How fast can a jar of peanut butter pull a whitetail buck out of thick cover and into shooting range? On a 200-acre lease in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, a group of 4 hunters ran a simple experiment last October. They smeared about 2 tablespoons of creamy peanut butter on a hardwood stump, roughly 25 yards from a ground blind. That's about the distance from a pitcher's mound to home plate, and set a trail camera with a timestamp. The first doe showed up 38 minutes later. A basket rack 6-pointer followed her in at the 52-minute mark, and by the 90-minute mark, the camera had logged 7 individual deer visiting that stump. The hunters on the adjacent ridge, sitting over a corn pile they'd refreshed that same morning, saw 2 deer all evening. Both setups were on the same property, same wind, same afternoon. The only difference was what was on the menu. Peanut butter isn't new in the deer hunting world. Old-timers in the southern Appalachians have been using it for decades. But most people who try it treat it like just another bait, slap some on a tree and hope for the best, and then wonder why the results are inconsistent. The reason it works when it works, and the reason it fails when it fails, comes down to something most hunters have never thought about. And once you understand it, peanut butter stops being a gimmick and becomes one of the most reliable tools in your pack. I'm going to walk you through the biology first, because that's what tells you where to put it, how much to use, and when it's a waste of time. Then we'll get into the actual setup, and near the end, there's a specific weather window where this method is roughly twice as effective as any other time of year. Most guys hunt right through it without ever knowing. The surface-level explanation you'll hear on most forums is simple. Deer like peanut butter because it's sweet and it smells strong. That's true, but it's about 20% of the story. If sweetness and strong smell were all it took, you could smear jelly on a rock and get the same result. You can't. I've tried. What makes peanut butter different is fat content. A standard jar of creamy peanut butter is roughly 50% fat by weight. That's an enormous caloric density for a wild food source. To put that in perspective, acorns, which are the gold standard natural deer attractant, run about 18 to 24% fat depending on species. White oak acorns, the ones deer prefer, sit around 18%. Peanut butter nearly triples that. A whitetail's metabolism is seasonal. In late summer, they're building fat reserves. In fall, they're in a caloric arms race against winter, and by December and January, they're running a deficit, burning more calories staying warm than they take in most days. Their body knows this. It's not a conscious decision. It's endocrine-driven hormonal signals that shift what foods the animal seeks out based on what it needs physiologically. During periods of caloric stress, deer actively seek high-fat food sources. Their olfactory system, those roughly 297 million scent receptors, is tuned to detect lipid volatiles, the airborne molecules that fat releases as it breaks down. Peanut butter is a lipid volatile bonfire. It broadcasts a fat signal that deer can pick up from significant distance downwind. A researcher at the University of Georgia's Deer Lab described it to me in a way that stuck. He said a deer walking through hardwoods in November is like a person walking through a food court blindfolded. You can't see anything, but your nose tells you exactly where the pizza is, where the cinnamon rolls are, and which direction to walk for the highest calorie option. Deer do this constantly. Their entire foraging strategy is olfactory-driven, and during the fall energy crunch, the nose prioritizes fat signals over sugar signals, protein signals, even mineral signals. Peanut butter hits that priority channel harder than almost anything you can legally place in the woods. This is the piece that changed how I think about attractants entirely. It's not about what smells good to a deer. It's about what the deer's body is telling it to find. A buck in October isn't just wandering around sniffing things because they're interesting. His metabolism is screaming for calories to fuel the rut. Peanut butter answers that signal in a way that corn, apples, and most commercial attractants don't, because none of them come close to the same fat concentration. You've been in this situation. Opening week, you've got your stand hung in what the ONX map says is a perfect funnel. A terrain funnel is a narrow strip of cover between two open areas that forces deer to walk through a specific corridor, and you're seeing tracks, fresh ones, rubs on every other sapling. But sit after sit, nothing during daylight. You start second-guessing the location, the wind, the time you're getting in. And then, one random Tuesday you can't hunt, you check the trail camera and there's a 140 Class 10-pointer standing 15 yards from your stand at 4:47 p.m. broad daylight. The deer are there. They're just not committing during the hours you need them to. What a high-value attractant does, and peanut butter qualifies, is give them a reason to commit earlier in the evening or later in the morning. It pulls the encounter window into your favor. Not every time, but often enough to matter. All right, the setup. You need 3 things. A jar of creamy peanut butter, the cheapest store brand you can find. Don't waste money on Jif or Skippy. The generic stuff from Walmart or Dollar General has higher oil content because they use lower-grade peanuts with more fat. That actually works in your favor. You need a stump, a downed log, or a rough-barked tree. And you need a cheap putty knife or a flat stick to spread it. That's it. Find a stump that's between 12 and 24 inches tall, roughly knee height or a little below. Cut stumps are perfect because the rough, splintered top surface holds the peanut butter and forces deer to spend time licking and working at it, instead of just grabbing a mouthful and leaving. If you don't have a stump, a fallen log works. Score the bark with a hatchet in a few places to create grooves that hold the peanut butter. You want the deer to have to work for it. That keeps them in front of your stand longer. Location of the stump matters just as much as the stump itself. Don't place it in the middle of a wide-open clearing. Deer, especially mature bucks, won't commit to an exposed food source during daylight. Look for a spot with some overhead canopy and at least one edge of thick cover within 40 or 50 yards, roughly the length of 2 bowling lanes side by side. That gives deer a sense of security. They can step out of cover, check the bait, and retreat quickly if something feels off. A stump sitting in timber near a known bedding area, that's where deer sleep during the day in thick cover where they feel safe, will outperform the same stump in an open food plot 10 times out of 10. The security factor overrides everything else when you're trying to get daylight movement. Spread about 2 tablespoons across the top of the stump. That's roughly a golf ball-sized amount. Don't go crazy. More is not better here, and I'll explain why in a second. Work it into the cracks and rough grain of the wood, so it doesn't just sit on top in a smooth layer. You want it embedded. A deer's tongue is rough, almost like fine sandpaper, and they'll spend 5 to 8 minutes working peanut butter out of wood grain. 5 minutes of a deer standing still at 25 yards is an eternity. That's the whole point. The reason you don't want to exceed 2 tablespoons is scent saturation. When you put too much peanut butter in one spot, the concentration of lipid volatiles in the immediate area gets so high that it actually makes deer cautious rather than curious. Think of it like perfume. A little bit draws you in. Too much makes you take a step back. With peanut butter, once you go past roughly 3 tablespoons on a single surface, trail camera data from multiple hunters on the bow hunter forums consistently shows longer approach times and more deer circling downwind without committing. 2 tablespoons is the sweet spot. Enough to broadcast, not enough to overwhelm. One thing I've started doing that seems to help, and I'll admit I don't have enough data to call this proven, is warming the peanut butter slightly before application. On cool mornings, I keep the jar inside my jacket on the drive to the property. Room temperature peanut butter spreads easier into wood grain and releases volatiles faster in the first hour. Cold peanut butter straight from your truck is stiffer and takes longer to start broadcasting. Small edge. But when you're trying to pull a deer inside an hour, That faster scent release might be the difference between seeing one during shooting light and seeing 20 minutes after dark. If you're enjoying this so far, subscribe. We've got more of these coming. Placement relative to your stand or blind matters more than most guys realize. The stump should be 20 to 30 yards from where you're sitting, about the distance across a decent-sized backyard, and it should be slightly upwind of the most likely deer approach route, not directly upwind of you. What you're creating is a scent funnel. The peanut butter scent drifts downwind on the breeze. A deer picks it up and follows the scent column toward the source. If you place the stump correctly, that scent column pulls the deer across your shooting lane on its way to the bait. The deer is focused on the stump, quartering toward you or broadside, and you've got a clean shot before it ever reaches the peanut butter. Most guys make the mistake of putting bait directly in front of their stand. That puts the deer facing you, staring at your position with its head down. A nervous animal with its eyes pointed at your tree is a hard shot and an easy bust. I hunted a ridge in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, for 3 seasons before I figured out the angle. My first 2 years, I hung the bait straight out from my stand at 20 yards. I saw deer. I even had them on the stump a few times, but every mature doe that came in would eventually look up and pin me. Something about the direct line of approach put them on edge. 3rd year, I offset the stump about 15 degrees to the east, so deer approaching from the bedding area to the south had to cross in front of me to reach it. My encounter quality went through the roof. Same stand, same bait, same property. Just a slight angle change. And if you're hunting from a ground blind, which is a pop-up fabric enclosure you sit inside at ground level, the offset matters even more. Ground blinds give off a silhouette that deer notice, especially in open timber. Offset the stump so approaching deer are looking at the narrow side profile of the blind, not the front window. A deer walking toward your front opening will pick up movement through the mesh every time. One walking past the side panel almost never does. One more thing about stump selection that took me a while to learn. Hardwood stumps outperform softwood by a wide margin. Oak, hickory, maple. The rough grain holds peanut butter in tiny pockets that release scent slowly as the oil seeps into the wood. Pine stumps have a resinous surface that repels the peanut butter oils, and the pine sap smell competes with the lipid signal. If all you've got is pine, use a fallen hardwood log instead, or bring a rough-cut piece of oak firewood and set it on the ground. I know a guy in Bath County, Virginia, who carries a 6-inch section of oak log in his pack for exactly this purpose. Sounds ridiculous until you see his trail camera photos. Where this falls apart, and you need to hear this part, is pressured public land. On state forests and wildlife management areas where hunters have used peanut butter before, mature deer associate the smell with danger. It becomes a warning signal instead of an attractant. I've seen this firsthand on the Monongahela National Forest. First year, a guy uses peanut butter on a new section. It works beautifully. Second year, the older does avoid it. By the 3rd year, the smart deer in the area have learned the pattern. If you're hunting public ground that sees moderate to heavy traffic, peanut butter is a one-season trick at best on any given spot. Rotate locations aggressively, at least a quarter mile between setups in consecutive years, or skip it entirely and focus on natural food sources and terrain instead. The other situation where peanut butter underperforms is early season, before the first hard frost. When temperatures stay above 65 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough that you're hunting in a t-shirt, the fat in peanut butter goes rancid faster. Within 12 to 16 hours in warm weather, the lipid profile shifts from attractive to repulsive. Rancid fat produces butyric acid, which deer associate with spoiled food and predator scat. So, in September and early October, across most of the country, you've got a narrow window between placement and effectiveness. Either place it the same day you hunt, within 4 to 6 hours, or wait until temperatures drop. Once overnight, lows consistently hit 40 degrees, or below. Peanut butter stays viable on a stump for 3 to 4 days before degradation becomes an issue. There's a legal note I need to mention. Baiting regulations vary by state, and in some cases by county. As of right now, peanut butter is legal to use as a deer attractant in states like West Virginia, Virginia, and most of the Southeast. But it's prohibited in states with baiting bans like Pennsylvania and several Midwestern states during certain seasons. Always check your state's current regulations before you set anything out. A game warden does not care how many deer your peanut butter attracted if you're hunting in a county where it's not allowed. A poll on the Archery Talk forum last fall asked bow hunters who used peanut butter to report their average time from placement to first deer sighting on camera. Out of 174 responses, the median was just under 2 hours. But the interesting part was the breakdown by temperature. Hunters who placed peanut butter when air temps were between 35 and 50 degrees reported a median time of 47 minutes. Hunters placing it above 60 degrees reported over 3 hours. That temperature band makes sense when you understand the biology. Cooler air is denser. Dense air holds scent molecules closer to the ground where deer breathe. And deer in that temperature range are actively feeding to build or maintain fat reserves. You've got better scent dispersal meeting higher motivation. Both dials turned up at the same time. I spent an embarrassing amount of money on commercial deer attractants before I landed on this. Come here, deer, Anilogix Bragan writes. Buck Jam, Wild Game Innovations apple-flavored mineral. $15 here, $20 there. 2 or 3 products per season for about 8 years. That's somewhere around $400 to $500 on stuff that deer visited on camera, with about the same consistency as a $4 jar of great value peanut butter from Walmart. A single jar lasts me roughly 6 to 8 applications, depending on how generous I am with the putty knife. That's an entire month of baiting for less than a single bottle of Buck Jam. Nobody was lying to me. The products work, but the margin between them and peanut butter doesn't justify the price difference. Not even close. Think about that for a second. A decade of buying attractants at premium prices, and the most effective option was in the grocery aisle between the bread and the jelly. This is the part that separates a decent peanut butter setup from one that consistently pulls deer in during huntable hours. It's about timing. Specifically, a weather window that most guys hunt right through without adjusting their strategy. The 72 hours following the first cold front that drops overnight temps below 32 degrees, cold enough that you see frost on your truck windshield in the morning, is the single most productive window for peanut butter over the entire season. The reason is a 2-part collision. First, the sudden temperature drop triggers an acute feeding response in deer. Their metabolism spikes to generate body heat, and they shift from browsing casually to actively seeking calorie-dense food sources. Second, that first hard frost kills off soft mast, things like persimmons, wild grapes, and late-season berries, that deer have been eating for weeks. Their preferred food source vanishes overnight. Peanut butter placed on a stump during that 72-hour window is answering a biological demand that just became urgent. Trail camera data from 3 properties I help manage in the Shenandoah Valley showed a 60% increase in daylight deer photos at peanut butter stations during first frost weeks compared to the 2 weeks prior. Same cameras, same spots, same amount of bait. The frost was the trigger. Time your peanut butter placement to that cold front, and you're not just attracting deer. You're intercepting a behavioral shift that's already happening. The jar costs $4. The putty knife costs $2. One application lasts 3 to 4 days in cool weather. You don't need a special trip, don't need to mix anything, don't need to worry about shelf life. Toss a jar in your pack next time you head out to check cameras or hang a stand. Find a stump in a spot with good sight lines and a crosswind to your setup. 2 tablespoons, worked into the grain. walk away. Come back in 48 hours with your bow. The stump will tell you whether it worked, because if deer have been there, the wood will be scraped white and clean, licked down to bare grain. And if you set a camera, you'll probably see the visit happened a lot sooner than you expected. Sometimes the simplest answer really is the right one. You just have to give it a chance.